Okay.
So this is what you'll find in the folder. I picked two fruit references just because I thought they were, I don't necessarily want to use the term simple because fruit can be very complex, but I figure they kind of relate to basic forms as far as simplistic overall shapes go. So I pulled the strawberries and the blueberries. I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm just feeling those blueberries. I'm leaning more towards that for my demonstration today, but I just wanted to include a couple options. You could also find something else to use, or you could have a simple object that you set up in front of you when we get into sort of the demonstration portion, or you could just choose to watch today and practice later on your own, because I'll be going over some different supplies and some different kind of steps, and there'll be, you know, some options you can take. And then I included a little example of a strawberry sketch. You'll see there's just the two strawberries, not the third, just to kind of show you, you don't necessarily have to include everything from a reference photo. You can crop it, change it. But usually if I'm doing something with colored pencils, I like to start with a sketch sort of like this, just very simple, very light, maybe some just basic line work and simple shapes. You'd call that like a contour drawing. Some people like to just dive in with color pencil and they don't start with a foundational drawing. That's really up to you and what your comfort level is. I don't know, I always like to have a little something, typically. Sometimes I go away from that, but typically I like a little something there. The other thing you're gonna find is a little practice template. Now, a couple ways you could use this is you could print this out, put it up to a window and trace it on like thicker paper. So it's not on printer paper, or you could just sort of look at it and freehand it, however you want to do that. Or there is the method, the transfer method, where you could either use transfer paper or shade the back of this with some pencil, so you can put it on different paper. But these are just some basic forms that you can use to practice with colored pencil, trying some of the different techniques, and then trying some different types of pencils, which I'll talk about too in a minute. And then the other thing is just a swatch template. And again, this could be something you print and trace, or it could be something you just sort of freehand. But this is just, so like, let's say you get a brand new set of colored pencils, or a set of watercolor pencils, or any new art supply. I think it's nice to lay down swatches of each color and label the colors, just so you have a better understanding of like what it actually looks like on paper. So that can be a neat thing to try. So these are just resources I'm sharing with you, and yeah, you can use what you like from them, but that can be helpful. All right, let me go ahead and change my camera. There we go. And I am going to spotlight this. Okay, so sitting here, I just have a book I wanted to show you all. I love art books. Even with all the resources on the internet, I still love books because I love to see like this kind of compiled guide by an artist. So this is Veronica Winters, and it's the colored pencil manual. And she has some just really neat images in here, like from a reference photo. So almost like the strawberry image, like I showed you, how she starts with simple lines and then kind of the buildup of colored pencil. Talks about looking at highlights and the shadows and all that stuff. So this is just a neat book. I thought I would show it to you because yeah, it's one I thought that I like. So really quickly, I want to talk to you guys about types of colored pencils. And when I mean types, I'm not talking about brands, but specifically the type of pencil and how it works. So these are watercolored pencils, or water soluble pencils. So meaning that the binder that's mixed with the pigment to make these pencils can be blended with water. So there's a variety of techniques you can do with these. I know quite a few of you have these and have used these. But basically, you know, the whole like dry on dry with wet blending would be, you would use these just like a normal colored pencil, fill in all the colors where you want them, and then you can blend down with just a paintbrush and some water. And you can actually do what I'm going to show you today, and this is an optional step, is actually a underpainting for a colored pencil drawing. So if you've got watercolor pencils, that's great, but they're not necessary. You don't absolutely have to have them. And then you have what would be soft core pencils. So a traditional color pencil, like a Prismacolor, and Prismacolor is a great brand, but there's lots of great brands out there. In fact, I don't know, I kind of want to dive a little bit more into trying some colored pencils and trying some of the like really fancy, expensive brands and just seeing how they compare a little bit. So that's kind of on my to-do list. But these run about like $1 a pencil or so, depending on where you get them. But soft core pencils are typically, the binder is going to have some kind of waxy or oil-based component that you can't blend this down with water. Okay, so blending methods for soft core colored pencils, you can use like mineral spirits, like a odorless mineral spirits that you'd use for oil painting. You can Gamasol, you can use. You can also use, these are colorless blenders. And then I've recently, I don't know that I'm super impressed with these, but I need to play with them more. This is a Prismacolor colorless blender. It's like a marker kind of a deal. There's like a thin side and a thicker side. So, and then I bought this other brand. It just says Finesse Colored Pencil Blender Pen. I think I maybe got these on Amazon just to try. So, you know, these are optional too. If you're using some kind of mineral spirit, or mineral spirits or something like that to blend, you'll want some kind of paintbrushes too for blending that. So any questions so far too? Feel free to ask questions if you've got them as I'm going. I know some of this information you guys already know, but I just kind of wanted to review those basics. So you've got your two kind of pencils, and then talking about paper. You've got different options for paper. So you've got like toned paper. This is Strathmore toned gray sketch paper. Let's see, this is 80 pound. So that's a decent, you probably wouldn't want anything less than that for colored pencil. And I got some of this black mixed media paper. You can do like a mixed media or Bristol. But the thing let me kind of retrace my steps a little bit, going back to the two types of colored pencil. So these papers here, when you're choosing paper, you want to ask yourself, are you going to do any kind of wet media on the paper? Any water or any solvent going onto the paper, you need something heavier. So I'll get to that in a minute. But if you're going to do just like soft core colored pencils and you're just going to do like a colorless blender and you're not putting anything liquid, then you can do like the toned paper, 80 pound. This is 184 pound mixed media. This is just like a white mixed media, or even just like a white drawing paper. So Strathmore, Canson, I mean, there's a lot of great brands out there that you can try, but I think having a decent paper that's got enough weight to it is important. The other thing you're thinking about is like the surface of the paper. So traditionally for a colored pencil, you want like a smooth surface. Now, there are little tiny bumps in the paper called the tooth of the paper, and there's fibers in paper, and that's kind of what holds on to the color and allows you to layer. That's why you don't want to smash color down right away, because you'll push all those fibers down and then you won't be able to add any more color. So there's some things to consider if you want a smooth surface, if you want something a little bumpy. Now, you can do watercolor paper as well. This is cold press, which has like a little bit of a texture, but otherwise, if you want something really smooth still, but you know you want to put water or solvent for blending on it, you could do like a hot press watercolor paper, or you could even do some printmaking papers. Like the Reeves BFK is really good. It's expensive paper, but it's like really good quality. So papers, lots of different things you can do. You know, honestly, me personally, if I'm using just a soft core color pencil, like just these Prismacolors, I really like to do a toned paper. I almost feel like white doesn't do color pencils, I don't know, any favors in a sense. I just personally, that's my preference. I really like gray especially, but black can be cool. Tan can be really great. But what I'm going to show you today is the process of sort of underpainting with watercolor pencils and then layering color pencil on top of it. And the reason you would do like an underpainting essentially with watercolor pencils first is to lay in basically all your color kind of quickly, that first layer, and it allows you to then build on top. And then, you know, kind of our process, we'll just talk about layering, we'll talk about some different ways you can use the pencils, and then we'll just kind of work through, like I said, I think I'm gonna do the blueberries, but if you would like to do the strawberries or something different, feel free. It could be kind of whatever you wanna do. And I'll just kind of walk through the process, and I'll, like as always, I try to give you guys options of things you could do and different choices for things. So don't feel like yours needs to look exactly like mine. I'm gonna let Ivan in a minute. I happen to, oops, my camera's a little blurry here. I did kind of lightly sketch mine. I don't know if you guys can see that. You guys see those blueberries? They're very light. So can you see them? No, not at all. I wonder if I angle down a little bit. Well, if you look at the blueberry picture here, let me actually pull up the blueberry picture on my phone. This will be easier. Okay, so here's the blueberries. So these blueberries are in that little folder I sent you. I also sent a picture of it, like an actual picture file to your email. So the reason I like these blueberries is because they're basically just kind of a play on a sphere, right? Like a kind of smushed sphere. So it's like a simple form. It's monochromatic, so I'm just kind of focusing on lights and darks. And to me, starting simple is really good. So what I'm using here, my paper is cold press watercolor paper. So you can use any kind of paper you want. Just keep in mind you want something heavyweight, like 140 pound or more, if you're gonna do water of any type on it, anything wet, a solvent, anything like that. And if you're gonna keep everything dry, then you can go ahead and do really any kind of drawing paper that you want. Again, I think like 80 pound, 70, 80 pound in that range is usually pretty good. Then what I did is I just took I had a 2H pencil. That's why you really can't see this. And for some reason, my camera is just going blurry. I think it's better. Okay, so I know it's really tricky to see this, but what I did is I lightly, with my 2H pencil, just sketched the 3 circles, started with the one in the foreground, then added the 2 that overlap or go behind. And then I added just a few little lines to kind of signify shifts in color and value, but then also a few of the more like prominent details. So if you want to go ahead and kind of do a simple little sketch of either the blueberries, the strawberries, or something of your choice, if you want to follow along today, go ahead and do that. If you want to just watch today, that's absolutely fine too. So I'm going to go ahead and set this here. I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. Maybe that'll help with some of the blurriness. And again, I want to keep this so light. I know it's really tricky for a video when you can't see it so much, but I want to keep this super duper light because I don't want this pencil showing through my color pencil. So actually, I put all my colors in these just tubs like this, but I kept my original box because sometimes what I like to do is separate my color palette. So like I'll look at my reference picture, or if I'm looking at something that's actually in front of me, and just try to look at the colors a minute. And then I'll go through my pencils. And I'm starting with watercolor pencils because I am going to do a little underpainting, but you do not need to do an underpainting. You can simply kind of do what I'm doing with the watercolor pencils with your soft core pencils, because you'll be able to blend later, whereas I'm going to just do kind of a little blending with my with the water first. Just kind of pay attention to like the colors and the shadows. Like it's not always that it's perfectly black. Now these berries are pretty dark in some of these areas, but I would even argue that there's a little bit of blue in with the black. So I am pulling some black, but just sort of paying attention to that. And the other thing too, as we kind of work on this underpainting, we'll kind of focus on like middle values, because that's a lot of the area. Then we'll kind of focus on our shadows and then highlights. And highlights can be done a few different ways. You can actually use just white colored pencil because it will layer on top. You can also use, like I have some gel pens. Gel pens worked for highlights. It actually sits on top of the color pencil. Or you could use like a paint marker. You could even use a little bit of gouache, some white gouache to pop in little highlights. But I mean, on the berry one, if you really truly look at it, there's not really much pure white. It's actually a very light tint of the blue. So that's just kind of one thing to keep in mind. These watercolor pencils, I have so many different blues. It's kind of crazy actually. And I don't think, it's not one of those things where you need a bunch of different colors. I think sometimes having limited color palette is best. Like, I mean, look at all those blues. I have one black, and then these are all the different blues. So it's like periwinkle and peacock blue. And so I might even say like, ooh, I want an ultramarine and indigo, and then maybe one other one. Like I don't need all of these necessarily. Let's set that down in a way that you can kind of see it. So again, what I'm doing is a little underpainting. If you do not have watercolor pencils and you don't want to do an underpainting because you just have soft core pencils, you can kind of do the same thing I'm doing just with your soft core pencils. So what I'm going to start with is I'm using like an indigo blue, and keep in mind colors don't need to be identical, but also you can create different combinations through layering. And then really quickly, actually, before I start this, I just want to show you a couple methods really quickly for how you can apply the pencil itself. So the actual mark making portion. So you can do like a directional hatching. Okay, this is typically, how a lot of people just kind of shade if you're doing something kind of simple. It's just you're all going in the same direction. You could also cross hatch. So you're going in one direction, and cross hatching can be very close together, or it could be spaced apart depending on what kind of texture you want to see. And you can cross hatch in as many different directions as you want. You can cross hatch once, you can go a third time and layer it this way. So you can cross hatch like however you want to do it, but it's just switching the directions of the lines. And then kind of a circular or stumbling sort of idea. The key here is just making sure your consistency is very even with your pencil. You want to be very careful to press down. You don't want to press down too hard because again, you'll smash the fibers of the paper down, and it's hard to add more color onto that after that happens. So stumbling can be done very like small, kind of overlapping little circles like this. Or you can do very big circular scumbles. Again, the key here is just even pressure. I don't want to all of a sudden like press down really hard and then press really light and then press down hard again. The key is just keeping it nice and even and just allow the strokes to gently overlap. And this too, you can overlap it and make it as smooth as you want, or you can leave it looser and play with texture. I mean, it's all great. Of course, there's that spectrum of how realistic you want it, how stylized you want it, if you want to boost color or play it up. You know me, I love my magenta. I'm already thinking, ooh, some pops of magenta might look kind of cool in this blueberry here. So as always, it's art, it's expressive. Feel free to change things and make it your own. And please, as I'm going through this process too, I'm trying to work a little bit smaller today just so I can kind of finish this up today, because, you know, sometimes it's hard to finish a whole little art project or a drawing in a class hour for me while I'm talking at the same time. So if you have any questions as I'm going through this, please feel free to let me know. So again, I'm starting with that indigo, and I'm just going to kind of keep this to some loose scumbles in the beginning, just nice and light. Now, it's kind of where you start depends on what you're drawing. Again, starting with middle values or mid-tones makes sense. That's anything that's not super dark or anything that's like a highlight, super light. So it's most kind of the mid-tone range. So some people like to start there. Some people like to put their shadows in first. But the key is you don't want to right away make it really dark. So sometimes you think shadow, I need to right away push that dark. But remember, you're going to gradually darken as you go. And as you're doing, if you are doing watercolor pencils, if you're choosing to go this route, you can like color everything first, like your dry pencil on dry paper, then take a brush and blend, or you can blend as you go. It's really up to you and how you like to work. And then, you know, in this phase too, it's very simple. Again, a little underpainting is not necessary for colored pencil, but it's something you can do. So that's kind of what I said, like if you want to follow along and try this, you can. And if you're not trying this today, I encourage you to try it sometime, just because I think it's a fun process. And the beauty of the watercolor pencils, after this all dries, your soft core pencil layers beautifully on top of this. But I do want you to keep in mind, after you start laying in your soft core pencil on top of a watercolor pencil, that's that pretty much. You will not be able to add any more watercolor pencil on top. And then when I'm putting in color too, I'm trying to look at like the bigger picture of everything. I'm not trying to focus on all the little itty bitty tiny details. So I've mentioned this in classes before, but like if you squint your eyes a little bit, that kind of helps you see the different shapes. And watercolor pencils, you can certainly layer, like for example, like this area is a little darker. I could certainly like take a little black and layer this in here too. So it doesn't have to be just one color. In fact, the thing about colored pencils is, I mean, personally, my preference is layering them. I think they look best when they're layered and when you allow yourself to sort of mix different colors together, because when we really look at things, when you truly look at things, like, yes, a blueberry is blue, but it's not just one single blue. So really studying what you're looking at, again, whether it's a picture reference or something in real life, but just pay attention to all the colors, because sometimes there's unexpected colors. And you don't only have to darken with black either. You can darken with the complement. So like I'm using blue right now as my main color. If I wanted to darken that, I could always bring in a little orange. Or if I need to darken my orange, I could bring in a little blue. And if you're doing an underpainting, you don't necessarily have to cover every surface with the watercolor pencil, because remember, you can use the water and blend it out to fill in areas. And of course, the soft core pencil will sit on top of the paper too, so it's not fully necessary. And if you're just doing some soft core pencils right now, it's really the same kind of thing. Like, I might as well be using a soft core pencil right now, where I'm just kind of laying in this kind of foundational tone and paying attention to the lights and the darks and the midtones. I try to break it down into kind of those three categories just to kind of simplify it, and just focusing on the bigger picture at the moment. So either approach is great. And you could also do a little underpainting with watercolor, like actual watercolor, if you don't have watercolor pencils on hand. And you could do a quick little underpainting, like a little wash over everything, let that dry, and then you could start layering the soft core pencils on top too. Prismacolor also makes these really neat art sticks that are basically, they're almost kind of like pastel shaped, kind of long and cubey, but they are all colored pencil, basically. Like, it's a colored pencil without the wood around it. So that can be really fun too for laying in really large areas of color quickly. And again, it's up to you how much detail you want to capture. As we begin adding layers, you'll be able to determine, you know, do you want all the little teensy tiny reflections that you see and all of that. Again, I'm just layering just a little bit of black. This is definitely, you know, things are not as dark as they will be, because this is, again, just that quick little underpainting. And I look at the cast shadow a little bit too. I tried to pick something just with some neutral backgrounds, just so we didn't really have to think about backgrounds right now and could just focus on the process first. But I think drawing in the cast shadows can sometimes be helpful too. And you could use this process really on anything. You know, I always, when I'm drawing something, I try not to think that, oh, I'm drawing these blueberries. You know, I just try to really focus on the lines and shapes that I see. And eventually we'll start focusing on value too, how light or dark something is. I mean, I am kind of paying attention to that right now, but clearly things just aren't as dark as they will be because I'm going to be layering. And it is okay to hop around between your lights and your darks and your midtones a little bit. I do try to kind of reserve highlights for last, but I just am mindful of where they'll be going. But again, there's lots of fun ways you can play with highlights with color pencil. And just because I start, like, for example, I might just take a little bit of my water here, and I've just got like a small little round brush. I'm just gonna go ahead and start blending a little bit of this watercolor here. So I do want it to dry so I can move on. I was actually thinking, I was like, ooh, maybe I should go get my hair dryer for today. I didn't end up doing it, but this is definitely sometimes, you know, it's like an art, you got to be a little patient, you got to let some things dry. So that is the one thing, if you are doing an underpainting today, you may find that you're going to have to let it dry for a little bit. And if you're not doing an underpainting today, well, you can just keep cruising right on past this then. When you're blending, if you do choose to blend with like some odorless mineral spirits, just a couple of things, you do still want to be mindful of like ventilation. If you do have a window you can open, or you know, just be mindful of how long you're spending with it. It's even odorless, you want to be careful. The other thing too is you're going to have some dry time with that as well. There'll be some downtime, but you can layer that up as much as you want. So when you are blending with, again, mineral spirits, you can let it dry, add more color, blend more, let it dry, add more color, blend more, and keep going through that process. But the second you burnish it with a colorless blender, that's it. That's like the last of it, besides maybe using a gel pen to put highlights or gouache or something that can actually sit on top. But after you do that, like, you won't be able to add any more colored pencil to it. So hopefully that makes sense, and I'll try to get to that point today, but I did want to mention that. So it's like, I mean, really, in a sense, you can almost create paintings with colored pencils, if you want to think of it that way, or almost in the way like you can kind of with oil pastels and stuff. And I definitely didn't put the watercolor pencil everywhere where it needed to be. I'm going to add a little bit through here. Now, of course, you can do watercolor pencil when it is wet, but it does get a little smudgy. So got to be a little careful with that. And then when I'm done just kind of giving this a quick little blend, I will start picking out my soft core colors and just kind of trying to isolate them a little bit. So again, I could work on my underpainting more, but for the sake of class today and the time, I'm going to call it good after this. And the thing about texture, like with your underpainting, you don't have to worry about that too much because you're just going to be able to cover that up. Right. Like I said, not everything is fully covered, but that's all I'm going to do for this underpainting. So I'm going to be done with my watercolor pencils. Like I said, I could spend more time on this realistically if I was investing more time into it. But I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pick out some colors here and just, like I said, set them aside. Sometimes it's nice, not that you can't go back and dig for more, but I think it's nice to just have some colors kind of ready to grab. And think about colors that you might, again, mix together. It's not always one exact color that's going to be the right thing. And you could think of colors that you might use to darken. Again, are you using black or are you going to darken with a complement? Again, the blueberry image is, I think black is appropriate, but other times I think, you know, it's nice to not use black. It's nice to use something different. This violet blue. Oh, that one's not sharpened. Again, you don't necessarily want to give yourself too many choices. You don't want to overwhelm yourself. So having something like having a higher quality colored pencil, but only having like 12 colors is, I think, better than having like really cheap colored pencils and having tons of colors, if that makes sense. So, you know, just consider that if you're ever shopping for colored pencils or need some. So, I mean, realistically, here's my issues. I do need to let this dry a little bit. So as this is drying, I'm just going to set this to the side for a minute and just kind of show you. So these are the watercolor pencils up here. So I just want to show you the difference between, we'll do a little blending with the mineral spirits a minute, and then I'll show you the burnishing too while this is kind of drying a minute. So I'm just going to, for these examples, just lay down a couple little swatches of color and just maybe layer some colors on top. Okay. So this isn't maybe the best paper to use for the mineral spirits, but it'll be fine, just to show you for today. Let's see, I'm gonna try that a little closer there. So again, I just got mine in a jar. Now I am using some I used for oil paint actually, but it's separated, so it just kind of feels like it's tinted, but the top is pretty clear, so I'm using it. And then I just have these soft brushes that these I use for oil painting, so they're fine for me to dip into here. And if you just put a little bit on your brush, and I just sort of blot it off just because I don't want too much on here. It's better to take it slow. And then what you can do is just gently, and this is maybe the best thing to show you for blending, but basically it's kind of, it has a similar effect that the watercolor pencils do when you put water on them, basically, because you're breaking down the binder. Just like in oil paint, you can't use water, right? Well, we're not using a pencil with something that's water soluble, so we have to use the mineral spirits to do that. So then, of course, this will be wet. And actually, you can't, yeah, you can see the difference on the screen. I was like, oh, maybe you really can't see it, but I did color those exactly the same. So hopefully you can kind of tell that it's blended a little bit more, but sometimes the video is tricky to see it. But when this dries, I have not yet like pressed super hard. I can still add more color to this and blend more. Let it dry and keep going. Okay, so that's kind of how it works with the mineral spirits. Now, I have had a colleague use like Vaseline before, baby oil before, but the only thing I'm a little wary of with those things is they tend to leave like a ring, like stain the paper a little bit. So if you do have those things at home and want to try them, just be a little careful because you don't want it to, again, you don't want like a ring, like an oil stain on your paper. That doesn't look so nice. Okay, so this is the colorless blender, and then this is the other little swatch. So again, I'm just doing the colorless blender on top. And you can see it produces a similar effect. except for I have to use pretty heavy pressure here. So what's happening is I'm pressing down the fibers of my paper. So once I do this, I really can't add more color, whereas here I can continue. The other thing you can do is after all your solvent has dried and you're done layering, you can burnish on top of this too. So burnishing is basically like the last thing you do, except for if you wanted to, I'll just kind of show you again because I want to give my paper a little bit more dry time. This would be a gel pen. So I haven't tested this one. I don't know how good this pen works. Yeah, that pen's not the greatest. Yeah, these pens might be a little old, to be honest with you, and the ink might sort of be dried up in there. I'll try this paint pen. But if you get like a nice fresh gel pen, it usually like it sits really nicely on top. I recently did a color pencil project with my high schoolers and gave them gel pens for highlights, and they came out really, really nicely. So this is the paint pen. Yeah, that sits on there a little bit better. You could always layer it too, but I know a lot of you guys have gouache or maybe white watercolor in a tube, so that can sit on top as well.
So it's a white gel pen, is that what it is?
Yeah, white. So this one is a white acrylic paint pen. Thule Art, I got this from Amazon, but Sharpie makes a paint pen that's really good. Sharpie's paint pen is really good. And there's some other brands. Well, actually, I've got this gel pen too. I don't know if this one will work or not. No, apparently I need all new gel pens. Apparently if they sit for a while, I don't know. I wonder if you could like warm some water up and maybe that would like help break the ink up. I don't know. Maybe there's a hack I could find to see if I could revive my gel pens. But yeah, just like the jelly roll pens work great. Any kind of gel pen. I think I'm pretty, I mean, in a perfect world, I'd probably let these dry just a bit more. But for the sake of our class, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of continue with it anyway, just so we can see a little bit more of the process. And yeah, we'll see how far we get on it. But, you know, I think, in my personal opinion, drawings and paintings don't have to be finished in a single session. I mean, sometimes they are, and absolutely they are. But, you know, there's never any pressure. I don't think that it needs to. So I do have, I just need to sharpen this. One thing I wanted to mention is sharpening your pencils. I highly recommend using a handheld sharpener to sharpen your colored pencils and your watercolor pencils, just because an electric one, as convenient as they are, you actually are wasting a lot of your you know, the lead over time. I had a really nice like Prismacolor sharpener that like held all the shavings in it, and I don't know, it's disappeared on me, or my daughter has snagged it, one of the two. Okay, so again, in a perfect world, I would let these dry out just a little bit more, but I think I'm going to start over here because this feels a little bit drier than this one. So with this one in the back, again, I'm just kind of squinting at the overall berry, and just, again, there's not, I mean, a ton of different colors going on here. I mean, I've kind of got this like lighter patch and this darker patch basically. So because of that, where I can kind of shift it into a light value and a dark value, I'm going to focus on my dark value first. Now, in some images, you might see more mid-tones than what we got going on here. So everything is different. And then as far as these soft core pencils go now, I'm just going to continue with light layers. I am in no rush to put this color on here. And I'm just sort of scumbling, just doing like a little circular motion. But remember, you can play around with your mark making and the way you choose to apply the color pencil, because different like movements that you make will have different textures. And I think that can be interesting. And again, me personally, just how my brain works and who I am as a person and an artist, I am never worried about having things be exact. I'm never worried about having colors be identical when I'm using like a picture like this, like a stock photo. There are times when I'm like more particular about color and certain things, but again, I think using reference photos to me is simply a starting point, and the art is going to evolve as I go. So I don't know, just some tips and things that I think about as I'm drawing. But I am looking, I do consider it like a study or an observational drawing, in the sense that I do have this image that's giving me information. It's just up to me how much of that information I want to use and include. But I mean, mastering color and mixing color exactly as you see it is definitely a skill that takes time too. So, I mean, if that is something you want to work on, I do think that's a great goal. And I definitely think making little swatches of all your colors would be very helpful for that. And then you could just kind of tape that up by your workspace or tuck it in a sketchbook that you can pull out when you're doing color pencil. So again, just gradual layers. Now, there may be a time and place where you just kind of all sudden go in and make it super duper dark, but I think most of the time you're gonna find slowly layering is gonna be best. Again, I've got some more texture on mine too, because I am using watercolor paper that's cold pressed. It does have a little bit of bumpiness to it. Whereas if I would have done the same process on like a smooth watercolor paper or on the hot press watercolor paper, it's going to produce a different result. And typically, I will say I do like smoother papers for color pencil, typically. But, I also didn't have any hot press on me, so sometimes you use what you got. And there's a lot of hopping around between your colors. I find myself going back and forth between light and dark, and that's again why I like to have all my colors in a little separate thing, so it's real easy for me to go back to it. But play around with light colors and dark colors that like clearly have white mixed in with them. Like these colors are good for some of these lighter areas, because again, it's not necessarily pure white. So sometimes these colors that have white in them are good, or layering white on top can help. And when you're doing something like this, you can simply work one berry at a time or one area at a time, or you can kind of hop around. So, and those of you who know me pretty well now know I like to hop around. And to me, it's just, it kind of helps I feel like it just makes it more unified. And also it's just how my brain works. And I'm still not worrying about blending at this point. I'm not worrying about tiny little details yet at this point. I'm still just trying to focus on building up layers and gradually getting there. I'm using like that indigo blue right now. And so I can gradually add this in, and I can bring some black in there to sort of darken. And the picture looks on the camera from, well, my perspective, it looks darker than it actually is. I see more hot or light areas in here than I think is actually showing on the screen. And you know, as far as blending goes, it's really up to you if you want to try, for example, if you want to try some of the solvent, the mineral spirits, or another method like that, or if you want to burnish, or if you simply like the color pencil texture too, because you know, sometimes simply just the way you apply the pencil creates a really interesting mark, and maybe you don't want to get rid of that. You want to leave that texture. So please don't think like, oh, you have to blend with color pencil. You don't. That's really up to you. But typically blending or burnishing, again, is like the last thing you do. And then you could add highlights if you wanted to with a gel pen or a paint marker or white gouache, or I mean, you could even do like white acrylic, honestly. Anything that would sort of sit on top. And you don't have to burnish with white either. You can burnish with other light colors. It's just kind of a matter of personal preference. So I think, you know, as with anything, it's good to just be open-minded and try things. I think trying like little fruits like this that take on just a basic form, like the play on a sphere, or you could do like a soup can, be like Andy Warhol, like a basic cylinder, or you know, really anything. Fruit, I just always think fruit's good. And I think, you know, it's good to play around between using photos as references, but then also real life or taking your own references. Again, the photos that I use for reference, if I don't take it myself, it's always from a royalty-free website. I know we don't have a ton of time left. You know, always goes so quick, but did have that little bit of dry time in there too. But basically, I mean, really, this is the process. Like I said, the last kind of thing I would do, and I mean, I'm not there yet. I just need more layers. And as I build it, it's gonna just kind of start coming together. But just to kind of show you, like if I did want to burnish something like in this corner, I would just take my colorless blender. I could go over top of it, and it just kind of smudges things, blends it together, gives it like a little bit of a shine on top almost. And that's basically what you do for your blending. And again, I do have these like little markers. If you want to try like this is just a Prismacolor colorless blending marker. And you could use it with the pencils, but you can also use these with their markers too. So there's different things you can do as far as that goes. But I know we're close on our time. I didn't know if anyone